Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Daffy's Roundtable. My guest that's joining me today is the man that knows everything about reptile lighting. Things that you don't even need to know about reptile lighting, he knows about reptile lighting. Of course, I'm talking about the one and only Tom of Tomaskas. On this episode, we talk about how he got into the hobby, how he became the world's leading expert on reptile lighting, how he became the world's leading expert on giraffe lighting. How do you even become that? We talk about how he started the business Tomaskas, where he learned all the information he learned from, and then we dive into the brand new Exo Terra T5 high output UVB that Tom actually helped design. This was a fascinating episode that I really enjoyed. I learned so much about reptile lighting, and I learned that I know so little about reptile lighting and that I myself need to be doing more research. There's a lot of really good information in this episode, and I think you're all going to enjoy it. But before we do that, allow me to thank Exo Terra for sponsoring this podcast and making this episode possible. Exo Terra makes quality products for our pet reptiles to make them feel at home. Okay, without further ado, and I'm going to introduce him like this because I love this title. Everybody, please help me welcome a world expert in giraffe lighting and a world expert in reptile lighting. The one, the only, Tom of Tomaskas.
Tom, hello.
Whoa, oh God. Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you very much for coming on.
No problem at all, anytime.
Yeah, I'm very excited to this episode. I think we have a lot to talk about. But before we get into some of the cool stuff, some of the stuff you're working on, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the hobby.
Sure. So, my name's Tom. I'm from the UK, and I run a animal welfare lighting and husbandry consultancy in the UK called Tomaskas. And a part of that is kind of in three main stages. The first stage is applying welfare and lighting principles into practice in zoos, so in the zoo world. The second thing is applying those principles into practice in the real world, if you like, in terms of keepers, and a lot of that comes from referrals from veterinary clinics where they send people to me. And then the third part is a consultancy on the development of products for animal welfare / lighting. So those kind of three things kind of feed each other as well, because the idea of working with a zoo enables me to have contact with the zoos from in how to develop products and developing products specifically for zoos, and equally developing products for the private market. But also, when I'm developing products, it works the other way, because I know what people in those worlds are looking for and what they want. So it works both ways. A little caveat before I go into too much. I know you are, on this show, specifically sponsored by Exo Terra, and no doubt we will touch on the new Exo Terra products that are on the market, and potentially some up-and-coming products that are coming out soon as well. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about anything, but I'm sure we can discuss concepts, and I'm sure you can take things from there.
Yeah.
But I do want to say I'm not paid. Excuse me, I'm not paid by Exo Terra to be here. I'm not being paid by Exo Terra to talk about the products or promote their products or anything like that. I was paid by Exo Terra to develop lamps for Exo Terra, and I am paid by Exo Terra going forward as well on more projects. Right, I've been paid in the past. I've been paid on the projects we're going to talk about today, and going to be paid in the future on more stuff as well. But that is not the same as me coming on this. This is a separate thing to that relationship. That's just a slight caveat, just to make sure that people aren't thinking that Exo Terra is somehow paying me to come on and promote products, because that's not actually what's going on. Another slight caveat, if I may.
Yes,
I will undoubtedly, during today's chat, say the word lamp. And I know that in the North American market, you guys say lamp, and you mean, I don't really have any, the dome fixture.
Yeah.
When I say lamp, I mean the bulb.
The bulb.
Or the tube, cool. Right? When I say lamp, I mean the usually glass thing that you plug in to make it light up. That's a lamp. That's, yeah. Another, and the third heads up is in November last year, I developed rosacea. And today it's starting to come back a little bit. So that's why I look perky and pink. I've been out in the sun a little bit today as well, but that's why I look perky and pink. But yes, so that's me. And I got into this world in a very roundabout way, probably the most normal way that most people who answer this question give, which is, they're as a kid, they love animals. But my access to this world is more than just reptiles and amphibians. I know a lot of people that you get on will just be herps, a few insects as well, no doubt, and invertebrates. But in the zoo world, in the professional world, mostly, I mostly work with mammals and birds. Reptile people and herp people tend to be pretty good in zoos, especially accredited zoos. So they tend to not need as much help. If you think of when you first buy your first hamster or guinea pig, you don't really ever get sold any lights to buy it, to use with it. So when those same people then go on and work with more exotic species, giraffes, rhinos, they also, it's completely out of the psyche of people to even address the idea of lighting these animals. But if you take a picture of a bearded dragon from the wild, and if you zoom out far enough, there'll be a kangaroo in the same picture, and the kangaroo is under the same light as the bearded dragon. If you, the sun, that is, if you take a lizard from sub-Saharan Africa and it's basking on a rock, and if you take a picture and you zoom out far enough, there'll be a giraffe in the same picture, right? It's that animal lives in the same environment, and often, especially with things like giraffe, they don't have the same microclimate access, right? They can't hide under a rock, or they can't hide in the shade. A giraffe is the shade. So a giraffe has evolved to specifically be exposed to a lot of light. So yeah, in the professional world, I deal with a lot of that. In terms of how I ended up getting into my own animals, I'm personally a little bit of a keeper as well. I have like a tegu, I have a whole bunch of tortoises, some emerald tree skinks, some Pristerus carteri, the Oman gecko, rock gecko, yeah.
Yeah.
I kept a garter snake when I was a kid, and I loved that garter snake. And then kind of grew out of it a little bit. I was always collecting bugs from the garden and trying to keep them in naturalistic enclosures made out of pots, like crayon boxes and stuff. And my inspiration really came back when we did a family trip to Kenya, and I fell in love with the concept of these wild animals, obviously. But we also went to a place which, for the love of me, I can't remember. I think it's called Nara Park. I want to say Nara Park, but it might not be that at all. And at Nara, they have a pairing of animals that is an Aldabra tortoise and a hippo called Owen and Mazee. And I think they're both rescue animals. They're not, they're not pets, and they're not bought. They're both rescue animals. And people can look this up, Owen and Mazee, M-Z-E-E. And these two animals essentially became best friends. And that whole concept to me was mind-blowing, that this sort of interspecies connection could happen. And then I found my autistic niche in lighting, I think. I have my other slight little weird niches. I like disinfectants as well, and I like fine print on rules and regulations. That's another thing that I like, which works really well with my lighting stuff, because it means that I can refer people to regulations.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's essentially it. Exactly. Nobody ever reads the terms and conditions, right? But I'm one of those people where, you look on a lamp and they all have the little symbols, the markings, the little, don't dim and all that sort of stuff. And there's usually regulations on how the proportions on those things and how big they have to be. And it probably doesn't surprise you, but a lot of products don't meet the appropriate regulations on those things. Yeah, so it's one of my fun things is to point those things out.
Okay, very interesting. So a couple of interesting things actually from that, like from your intro. Can we talk about your profession? Do you do Tomaskas full time, or do you have okay, so when you're talking about working in the zoos and aquariums industry, it's through Tomaskas and through
so they pay. So it's my company, and they officially pay Tomaskas to come in and give advice or consult on a specific project, a specific build, or it may be a range of enclosures. Maybe they're due a visit from the zoo licensing authority in the UK or their equivalent, because they do it all over the world. Maybe they do that, or maybe they're due and they just want to make sure they can tick all the boxes before the guy comes with his boxes to tick. So I go through and do a quick box ticking exercise with them. Maybe they want to upgrade a few enclosures. Maybe they've just had a new team lead who wants to just kind of get an idea of what the state of play is. That's quite a common thing to happen. So a new team lead will come in on ectotherms, and they've worked in another zoo. They know a few people, they know a few things, but they actually want to know what the state of play is going on right now and what needs to be done from a welfare perspective. So they get me to come and do that. And most high up zoos have, at least accredited zoos again, have a dedicated welfare team. So I work closely with those, like the dedicated welfare officers or welfare managers at the zoo. If it's a big zoo that has, the usual big animals, then they'll usually have some sort of welfare team specifically. And they'll be usually the ones who commission me to come in and check things out.
Fascinating. And then how did you, I know you said you like the fine print and that's kind of how you found your niche, but how did you get into the lighting niche?
It's a really good question. So I remember when I first when we came back from Africa, we came back from Kenya, and I was in love with tortoises, and I got a Herman's tortoise. And I did some research, and I joined in the UK. We had, I think it's still a thing, but we had Reptile Forums UK, RF UK it's called. And I remember going to a pet store, and I couldn't tell you which, but I remember going to a pet store and purchasing a T8 tube, because that's all there was at the time. It was 2008 maybe. A T8 tube, and realizing that there was different versions, right? There was a 5% and a 10% essentially on the wall, on the shop floor. And I bought the 10% because that's what I had before. But I questioned what are these different? Why are they different? What's different about them? So I went on Reptile Forums UK and I posted a question: what's the difference between these things? And it was some Arcadia lamps, and I said, what is the difference between these two lamps? Is there, does anybody know what the actual difference is? And a guy who worked for Arcadia, still works for Arcadia, his name's John, commented and said, yeah, we get them tested by a professional, and we XYZ. We they're different because the 10% has a higher output is essentially the answer. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. So somebody's job is to test these things and make sure that is that it's right. And a little bit of digging later, it turns out that the person who tests those things was a lady called Dr. Frances Baines.
I'm familiar, yes.
Yeah. And I ended up on her website, uvguide.co.uk, I think it is, or uv-guide, or words to that effect. And it was a plethora of information, right? It was a huge website of information. It was constantly being updated. And she did these amazing irradiance charts where you can see the light that's coming off the lamps and she hand drew them on a wall and did all this sort of crazy stuff. She had all these reports on all these lamps. It was amazing. And I remember going on that website and printing it and making notes. And I explicitly remember being told off by my father because I printed the website in color, and it was a black background website and white text, and it was
you finished all the black
so
ink.
Much ink. I mean, I think I came back to just like a wet, floppy piece of paper that was just like you couldn't even read the words. So yeah, I remember that very, very clearly. That's one of those like repressed memories. And I was so impressed. I was so blown away. And then I obviously read more of her work when she published it, and I read the Ferguson Zone stuff when that came out. That's the 2016 study in the paper in the Journal of Zoo and Aquaria. And then I joined the Reptile Lighting Facebook group, which is something that Frances Baines runs.
Yeah.
and was a very active member. And then got speaking to Fran over a couple of months, and attended a conference where she was as well, and helped her out with some stuff. And she basically said, I'm retiring. I'm retiring. I'm trying to step away from this. And I don't know. I have no idea how old she is, but she's definitely due a retirement, and that's not in an offensive way. That's just she's been doing it for many, many years, right?
Yeah.
And I said, well, who's going to do what you do? And she said, nobody really. There are a few other people out there who could do it, but nobody really has a dedicated time to it, right? There are other people who do it. Dr. Serena Wunderlich does lamp testing, and she's amazing at it, and she's actually the best in the world, I think. But she doesn't do that full time, right? So that's not her job. Her job is her actual job, and she kind of does it as a passion project.
Right.
And there are many other people who can do it, and there are laboratories who do it for regulatory reasons, but none of those labs specialize in testing lamps for animals, right? With an idea of biology and welfare. So I thought, okay, what do I need to do to fill this niche before Fran retires? And a couple of tens of thousands of pounds later, I have a little laboratory in the garage where I test lights, and I have a spectrometer with all the gizmos and gadgets and all the pieces of glass that have different attenuations on them, and a little integration station thing, and all sorts of crazy stuff going on that I go in with my laptop, plug my laptop in, and let it do its job. And I burn lamps in and test them and all that sort of stuff. And that is how that started. Basically, it was a right place, right time. Francis Baines retiring and offering a wealth of knowledge to me. it was. I mean, like, I still refer to her on all sorts of stuff. I'll say, "What do you think of this?" And she'll give some advice, and I'll say, "Oh, that's a really good." Or we'll have a back and forth, a little bit of a debate about why or why not, and that's just how it is. And that is essentially how I started doing that, and it kind of worked the same way in the zoo world, because Fran became known in the zoo world thanks to her work on the UV guide stuff and the Ferguson zone stuff. The idea of building a standard for zoos for providing ultraviolet to animals, or at least UVB, was massive, right? No one had ever made a standard like this before. So that got her involved in the zoos, and it's just like anything else. You associate with people who sing the same tunes as you, right? So I met some zoo people, and I visited zoos with Fran, and now that is a massive part of my job as well. And through doing that, you then also meet people in other parts, because Fran did some other taxa as well, but she mainly is known for her reptile stuff. You meet mammal people, and then you do a talk at a conference where there are mammal people just happen to be there, and then they come over and they go, "Oh my god, that was mind-blowing, can you come and talk to us about?" And then all of a sudden you're
going to different zoos,
the lighting expert of giraffes in the world, and I don't know anything about giraffes, but apparently I'm a lighting expert. So yeah, that's essentially, it was a magical accident is what happened.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Fascinating story. That's so I had no idea that's how everything started. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's
very
insane.
Cool
I know.
story,
It's a weird story. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so I do want to get back to what goes on in your garage, in your lab, in the testing
It's
stuff.
the lab, yeah.
Yeah, the lab, yeah. Hey, it sounds like a lab to me.
Hey, cool. Yeah, it is a lab. Yeah, I have an office as well. I do have an office as well that's off-site and stuff that I can do other things with. But when I'm testing things, kind of here, I do it in the garage. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I definitely want to get back to this, but before we go too far away from the zoo topic that we're currently on, I want to hear a little bit more about giraffes and UVB, because aren't most zoos keeping them outside anyway, and they're getting that UVB, or is there? And then the reverse of that is, if they're not getting enough, where are you mounting these UVB lamps? Like, yeah, I'd love to hear a little more about that story. Yeah, it's very interesting.
This is a bit of a personal project for mine for the last 12 months.
Okay, yeah, if you're cool with talking about it.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
okay,
great
cool.
because it's so on topic for me to be the giraffe guy.
Awesome. Okay.
So, where do I begin? Giraffe in captivity have a few issues with them. And most animals that are kept in zoos, there are sort of, I don't want to say in jokes because they're not really jokes, but it's kind of like a common problem that most animals have, and it's in captivity, or most members of a certain species will have in captivity. For example, flamingos generally have bumblefoot, right? Generally, flamingos kept north of the Tropic of Cancer, maybe. Is it Tropic of Cancer? Is the north one, isn't it? So most of them that are kept like that will develop bumblefoot. All right, and that's just a thing, right? They just develop bumblefoot, and we do things to try and alleviate it, and a lot of them we can fix it, but it's almost like a joke. It's like, oh god, how many have got bumblefoot at your zoo? And because they just do, right? And with giraffe, there are two main issues. One of them is teeth issues. They generally have teeth issues, and the other is hoof issues, so the feet. And the teeth issues we can almost certainly put down to diet. In captivity, we feed them a lot of grasses and a lot of food that is not suitable for them. Giraffe in the wild don't really eat grass; they eat leaves, so they eat browse rather than graze. And graze or grass has a lot more silica in it, which is glass essentially. And if you chew a lot of grass, when you're not evolved to eat grass, it will wear away your teeth. And what we find in captivity is that giraffe tend to have abscesses at the back. And when we generally find out this when they're dead and we cut them open, and we find that a lot of their teeth at the back are rotting and the jaw at the back is ruined, and they have big abscesses at the back. And we think that is mostly to do with diet. We think that they're chewing too much on grass when they should be eating leaves and bark. Right? That's what they've evolved to eat. The hoof issue is it's almost certainly multifaceted, that, by the way, but generally we put it into diet. The hoof issue is equally multifaceted, and it's potentially a few different things. But if you look at a wild giraffe hoof, they have two claws, two main claws, and the gap between them is non-existent. Right? There's no gap between those two claws. If you look at them in captivity, there's almost always a gap, and the claws are almost always overlapping in some way, on at least one foot, and that's usually the weak foot. And again, this is multifaceted, so it could be that they're not on the right substrate, so they're not being worn down properly. It could be that they're not in large enough enclosures, i.e. they're not walking far enough distances. Right? These animals in the wild go on massive migrations. Or massive walks. They tend not to migrate, but they walk a long distance in the wild. In captivity, they don't do that. But the other thing that I proposed at a conference 18 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, was that we've taken an animal out of Africa where it is sunny for 360 of the 365 days of the year.
Yeah.
And of the sun, it is a UVI 12 most of the time that they're in. Right? They're not in the shade. And it's an animal that has heavily evolved to be exposed to those high intensities of UV. And we can see that with fur that doesn't allow UV to pass as well. And the tongue is purple, which means it's kind of essentially got a sunblock built in. So when they're putting the tongue out and eating leaves, they're not getting sunburn on the tongue. So it's an animal that's evolved and has been designed by nature to be in the sun. And you take that animal and you put it into the northern hemisphere, such as Scotland, where it is sunny for 2 months of the year, and the UVI on those 2 months is a UVI 5. That's an animal that's not getting its vitamin D.
Yeah.
And my hypothesis would be that those animals would have thin bones. And lo and behold, you do a post-mortem on a giraffe, and every single giraffe that we've done a post-mortem on that I've seen has thin bones, has low bone density, has spongy hooves. The hooves are a really vascular part of the skeletal system on a giraffe. And in the wild, the hooves are rock solid. You do a post-mortem on a dead wild giraffe, and you pick up the hoof, and it's a heavy thing, and it's rock solid. You look at the hoof of a captive giraffe, and it's like a sponge. It almost looks like, if anybody's ever seen the inside of a tortoise shell, that tortoise is suffering from metabolic bone disease, or the X-rays of a young child that's got rickets. Right. Well, we have names for it in other species. We have metabolic bone disease in reptiles. We have rickets when it's in humans, and in giraffes we just say they get bad hooves. And my hypothesis and my proposal is maybe we should try giving these things ultraviolet and having a look at the calcium that's in the plant matter that we feed them. Try and reverse any sort of calcium phosphorus ratio that they've got, the same way that we've been doing with reptiles for the last 30 years to fix the problem that we face with those. And maybe it'll work. It gets to the point with giraffes where when a mother giraffe is gestating, when she's got a baby, instead of metabolizing her own bones like they normally would, she starts metabolizing the baby's bones. So the babies are born with metabolic bone disease.
Right.
And often they will be born and break their legs. Now, in the wild, that's very, very rare because they're born and they fall from the mother, right? The mother's tall, and they fall and they land.
I've seen a video, yeah.
Yeah, and they just smack and you think, oh my God. And they're fine. In captivity, it's a really worrying time. There's a chance they'll fall and die. And that's something we shouldn't be worried about because that's something that they
naturally do.
Should just happen. Yeah, they should just fall and be fine. We really worry about them going outside for the first time in captivity. When you let a giraffe outside for the first time, it runs around and it's really excited. Great. But we're worried that they'll fall over and break their legs. In the wild, they fall over all the time and don't break their legs. It's a weird thing that we've put on ourselves. And this isn't just giraffes. We do this with all animals, right? We have this, like I say, with flamingos, we have this sort of thing where it's, they just get bumblefoot, and it's like, well, maybe there's something to that. maybe there's
a way to fix that. Yeah.
Maybe and it might not be lighting. It might be maybe the substrate is wrong. Maybe the water hasn't got the right pH that you're keeping in. Whatever it may be. Again, it may be multifaceted. It may be more than one thing. And I say this to people in the private world all the time with pets that come out of clinic is that 99% of the problems that people go to the vet with, they're not medical problems. It's a husbandry problem. So they'll go to the vet and they'll say, my bearded dragon isn't eating. And it's not that it's necessarily unwell. It's just that the lights aren't working or the lamps aren't right. Yeah. Or they'll go and they'll say the tortoise is kind of lethargic. And then the problem isn't necessarily that its blood sugar is low, or it's that the husbandry isn't correct. And my hypothesis and my proposal to the zookeeping community is that maybe, and they know this, maybe a lot of the issues they face is husbandry related. And rather than trying to patch up the issues and putting out fires all the time, maybe if we addressed whatever the husbandry issue is, try and find it out and see if that fixes the issue. To answer the question on how you do it, that's a whole different question. Yeah. Because it is not easy.
Have you been working on this for a while? Sorry to interrupt you. Have you been working on this for a while?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You seem to know a lot about giraffes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like I say. I've all of a sudden become the giraffe lighting consultant. So I get a lot of giraffe zoos emailing me asking me about the lighting for the giraffe.
That's very interesting.
Which is great, but it's hilarious because there isn't really a way to do it.
Right. Yeah.
The answer is you can't. That's the truth. What can you do?
And are you involved in studies?
So we've got some wild blood values coming in, and we're doing a study. I can't name the zoo, but we're doing a study with the zoo. It's in America, and people can look this up. If they search giraffe zoo in America, there's only a few that are famous for it. It's one of them, and we're building a new giraffe house, and. Very cool. We're also retrofitting the old giraffe house with lighting.
I think I already know which zoo this is.
The idea being that we can test specifically the old house, because the old house will be used as a nursery. So we can measure the D3 in the blood on a young giraffe as it grows, compare it with values that we already have from young giraffe that have grown without the light, and we can see what the difference is. And then in 20 years, 30 years, when that animal hopefully lives a long life and passes away, we can see what the difference is. I don't think we're going to be putting any animals down for testing them ahead of time. We can try doing X-rays. This particular zoo is very good at training the giraffe, so they could potentially train a giraffe to put its foot on a pad and get an X-ray. That's not hard to do. So yeah, that's something we're looking at, and it's something that we're actively involved in. There's a really good giraffe veterinary consultancy that works. Her name's Lisa, and she is working. She's very keen on this because she believes that things make sense, right? And it does make sense. The idea that these animals that are from some of the sunniest parts of the world, maybe that sun is pretty good for them. She believes that that's probably true, and it would save her almost certainly a lot of time trying to fix giraffe feet if it was just not a problem anymore. So yeah, and like I said, there's almost certainly multifaceted. There's almost certainly other issues, right? Maybe don't keep them on rubber mats. Maybe don't keep them on as much grass. Maybe give them a bit more grit and stuff to walk on. That almost certainly will help. But I think that the fundamental issue of the hooves being deformed from a skeletal perspective is, I don't want to say without a doubt, but it's pretty bloody almost certainly a vitamin D and calcium issue, which we know because we've seen it in almost every other species there is.
Makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, which is why we want to test it.
Yeah. And so that's also how you're doing it, is by putting them indoors. When they're young, they're indoors anyway. That's just a zoo standard. They tend to keep them indoors.
Again, that's because they're scared of them going out and breaking their legs. Maybe they wouldn't need to do that anymore either. But it's also so they can keep an eye on the babies and stuff like that. It makes perfect sense for that. Yeah. But a lot of these, they're in the northern hemisphere, right? So that even when they do get the sun, it's not necessarily the same intensity as they would be getting from all year round when they're in Africa. Sure. So yes, they can get some sun for the summer months, but when it's winter time and this place is known for its snow and its cold weather, in the wintertime, they may not get the same natural levels that they would get in the wild. And potentially that is what the issue is. So maybe we can supplement it for some of the year, which is what we're looking at doing, basically. And physically, logistically, how to do it is a whole other nightmare because you need some big, big lamps.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's a weird world, isn't it?
So cool, man. So cool. I had no idea that any of this was going on, or that it was even a concern.
With there's
giraffes and rhinos and those kind of things.
Lots of this
makes sense. Okay, I'll ask you one more question about that,
sure,
and then we can get to what we're actually here to talk about because we haven't even touched on light. Well, I guess we've been talking about lighting.
Yeah, it's all the same.
It's all the same.
I'll touch on these values later on. Don't worry. It's all
okay. Cool. So, do you see it in the near future or in the future, it becoming a thing where other pets, for example, hamsters, you mentioned hamsters, or other common house pets are going to start needing these elaborate setups and lighting like reptiles?
Really good question. So I think there's multiple ways of approaching it. In terms of the actual wording of your question, which is, do they need it, or will they need it? Almost certainly not, because they survive without it so far, right?
Right.
So in a word, no. But from a welfare perspective, and this is something that's happening in the zoo world, in the UK, we've got something called the Secretary of State Standards for Modern Zoo Practice, SSS-MZP, and that's coming in a few months, maybe. It's been going for 10 years, but we're told it's this year. And a part of that is a bit more of an emphasis on the 5 domains, which is sort of like a 5 freedoms thing. But there's a big emphasis on welfare. And zoos, or at least accredited zoos, are, from a welfare perspective, they're stepping away from, does an animal need this? Because that immediately sets our boundaries as to what we can do.
Yeah.
Instead, we should ask, would an animal's welfare increase or improve by including this? You can put it into perspective with a leopard gecko, right? Does a leopard gecko need a varied diet? No. They can survive perfectly fine on crickets. Would an animal's welfare, would the gecko's welfare improve if that gecko was fed a varied diet of gut-loaded insects? Mealworms, crickets, dubia roaches, worms. Yes, it would.
Yes.
Absolutely, it would improve, and the welfare would go up, measurably go up. And that is the approach that zoos are taking with every aspect of care, as the modern zoo practice essentially tells them to. With that, potentially we will start to see that in things like, in the UK, we have the Animal Welfare Act. And we may see similar things brought in with that, with a slight reform of the Welfare Act. I don't anticipate it anytime soon, but it will almost certainly happen. And especially as there are more and more advancing niches. So there are people who keep guinea pigs as pets, but then there are people who keep guinea pigs, and those people are the guinea pig crew. As more of those people become more scientifically inclined, and as the world of zoo and private blends more, because that is happening as well, especially with animals like guinea pigs, because there are many zoos in the UK that have guinea pigs, those worlds will ultimately merge into, or not merge, but touch at least a little bit. And in that, I foresee a shift in the approach for many keepers, not for all keepers, but for many keepers, to advance their welfare in a sense of, does this improve the welfare of the animal? i.e. asking that question rather than, does my animal need it? And I mean, ultimately, that to me is the ethos of an advancing keeper, right? Is rather than focusing on what the animal needs, you focus on what can improve the welfare of the animal. And in that sense, yes, guinea pigs, hamsters, all those animals. I mean, the word guinea pig is often used as like a joke, as like, oh, a test subject. Right?
A test subject, yeah, guinea pig, yeah.
Ironically, the tests on UV and vitamin D, most of them are on guinea pigs. Like, I don't see any tests on guinea pigs. Always rats and mice, right? Guinea pigs are, in the world of UV, guinea pigs are the number one. They are tested loads, and it's well and truly guaranteed those things benefit from UVB. Even physically,
the tests have already been done.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The tests have been done on the basis of, it works for guinea pigs, it must work for humans, right?
Right.
We've literally tested guinea pigs, and their vitamin D goes up, and attentiveness goes up, and lots of in the science world, these markers, but in the welfare world, we look at it and go, that's a welfare marker. Like, their attentiveness going up, and their ability to consume food, and that goes up, that increases when you give them vitamin D and UVB. That's a welfare marker. The welfare improves when you provide them UVB. So from a welfare perspective, yeah, I can see some people approaching it from that way. We're working with, there's a zoo in the UK, Whipsnade Zoo, has guinea pigs, it has rabbits, it has like a little farm section with goats and stuff like that, and they have little guinea pigs and stuff. And they provide UVB for the guinea pigs on the basis that it's good for their welfare, right? Then they can go outside, but in the winter, they don't really want to. But they do like to sit under the UVB lights.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, so yes, to answer the question, yeah, I don't see a requirement for it, and I don't, at least not in the immediate future, and I don't see you go into PetSmart and they start selling you a UVB light for your guinea pig, because they only just about do that for bloody bearded dragons.
Yeah.
So I don't see them doing it for guinea pigs, but In terms of advanced keepers, yeah, there's certainly an argument. There's an argument to say why they're not already doing it, in my opinion. But that's me being a advancing prick. Is essentially what I'm being. One of those people.
No, it works. It works. That's awesome. Okay, cool. So the garage, the lab.
Yes.
So could you maybe kind of break down some of the tests that you do there, how it works testing a lamp for UVB, and then we can flip it into kind of what goes into designing it as well. But yeah, so
sure.
Yeah.
So part of my consultancy is checking lamps over physically, making sure they're physically okay, but also measuring their output. And it's not just UVB lights. It can be an infrared lamp. It can be a heat lamp. It could be a visible light. It could be an LED as well. And I have in the garage a piece of kit that is called a spectrometer. And this is a piece of equipment that essentially photographs the light that comes from the actual physical light that comes from the lamp, and reads data from it. And physically, what happens is light goes in, hits like a prism, essentially a prism, that then splits the light up, and then that hits a sensor, and the sensor reads the light that hits the sensor from the prism. So the prism splits the light up into its different pieces, and there are lines of sensors that read those split out pieces of light, essentially. And then that goes onto computer, and it gives you data. And with that, what I'm essentially measuring is, we call it the spectrum, and it's the spectral output of a light or of a lamp. And that is our measure and way of knowing what is physically actually coming from a lamp. We can see, for example, that a lamp emits visible light, right? We can see that. But our eyes can be very easily tricked. And a good way of knowing that is that most LEDs that we use are white. To us, they appear white. But actually, they're not white. It's a blue LED. It's a blue diode. And over the top is an orange phosphor. And if you have one turned off and you look at it, you see little orange squares. And that's what the phosphor is, the orange square. And underneath that, if you take off the orange square, it doesn't actually have any color, but it's a diode that when you turn it on, it's blue, right? If you take off the orange, you turn the lamp on, it'll turn blue instead. And you mix that blue and that orange together, and it produces a color that tricks our eyes into thinking it's white. And that's why LEDs are white. So to us, it looks white, but actually when you measure the spectrum, when you measure what comes off it, you can see physically that it is a blue diode. There is if I show you a graph, you can see it's a blue peak, and there is another bit of color, and that's the phosphor glowing. And that's physically what the light produces. And we can deduce then from the data that the lamp is an LED, just from looking at the spectrum. But I can also tell you information about the brightness that it would be, the lux it would be. I can tell you information about the color rendering index it would have. So color rendering index is like a way of how well it renders colors. And I know that kind of makes no sense because I just repeated the words, but a way of how well the colors look to people, essentially color rendering index.
Cool.
But it can also tell you if the lamp is emitting anything that it shouldn't, right? So if it's emitting some crazy UVC, I can see that from the data that it spits out. And it spits out data as like a load of code, and it kind of looks like the Matrix. It's just a load of numbers. But I have software that takes that code and puts it into a visual format. So even just looking at it real quick, once you know what you're looking at, you can look at it real quick and know what's going on. And eventually when you get really good, you can look at the data and know what's going on, but that's full on. And most people will know a spectral graph, hopefully, because they'll have bought a UVB lamp of some kind, and they'll have potentially seen one on the back of the box. It's like a little graph. It kind of shows the colors, essentially. And it's usually got a rainbow pattern on it or whatever it may be. It's usually on the tube, but the box for the tube. I don't actually have any here with me.
I'm looking to see if it's on any of these.
There should be one on the Exo Terras.
It isn't on there, but there's a QR code you can scan right there. And
yeah. Oh, here's one.
Which I guess.
Here's a lucky reptile metal halide. He says, dropping all his stuff. And that's a spectral reading.
Yeah, so there we go. Yeah.
A little map of colors on it. And that is essentially what my software reads is that. And then with that, I can then look at the peak wavelengths and which ones are troughs and what's missing from the spectrum, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of, and any lab can really do that. Any light lab can do that. But what those light labs can't then do is apply that data and that information to animal welfare, because there are no official standards, right? Where we have in lamp safety, if you want to get a lamp in the UK safety tested, you go to a standard called EN 62560, which is like a safety standard, and you get a little mark on the lamp to say it's safety approved and all that sort of crap. There is no standard for that, right? There is no standard for animal lights. So we use the sun as a standard, and we use studies on examples as standards. And that's essentially what my lab does, is takes that data, reads the data, gets measurements that most people could probably get if they have the right meters. They're not overly expensive. The lux meter and the solar meter, they're not cheap, but it's not tens of thousands of pounds. It's, you could, for £1,000, you could, or $1,000, you could get a few little meters and do a pretty good job of getting a good load of readings from a lamp. But what those meters don't do is they don't tell you anything about the spectrum. They just tell you what the meter reads. And what I do is I take both sets of data and apply it to how that applies to animals. And like I say, as a general rule, we use the sun as a reference, because that is what we're always, quote unquote, trying to achieve. So it's always about trying to replicate sunlight. But I have I have my own definition of replicate sunlight as well. But that's the same. What I offer with that is my services of consulting is being able to test lamps with a mindset of animal welfare, rather than what a lab can do, which is just give you the spectral data. Now I can take the spectral data from another lab, and look at it, and I do that quite a lot as well. But it's nice to also have a look at the lamp and have a feel for the lamp. And I know that sounds very artsy and weird, but it also means I can like, this is really weird, but there's like things on with glass where if you scratch it, it's got like a certain feeling and a sound. And this may be just an autistic thing of mine, but certain types of glass, like quartz glass, has a certain feel when you scratch it with your fingernail. And borosilicate glass is different, and you can, this is in no way scientific, but you can get a good feel for the quality of the lamp by giving it a little scratch, if you know what you're feeling for. And it's if you get like a load of prototypes from China and they're crap, I can usually tell they're crap before I turn them on, because I can just feel it. I can, like, this sounds mental, I know, but I can feel this. Like I go, oh, there's a lot of quartz in that glass, and there shouldn't really be much quartz, if anything, in that glass. So it's whereas a lab won't do that. A lab will
just test it, and
they test it and send you the data. Yeah, and of course, what I do then is go back and forth. Yeah, it's experience and a deep obsession with lighting and making sure things are done a certain way. And I think I've essentially monetized my autism, is essentially what I've done in a really fun way. I mean, it's
the best thing ever. Yeah,
it's worked. Yeah, it's worked, because it means I get to just do the weirdest stuff with lights and get paid, and then get paid hilariously. Get paid to then go back to the brand when they're paying me to develop a lamp and tell them it's bad, and they go, cool, thanks. What do we want us to change? And that's mind blowing to me that they're paying me to tell them something is bad, and
are open to hearing about what
the idea being that they will improve it. Yeah, and I give them pointers on how to improve it as well. But it's I always find it really fun that if you say something bad, people don't like that at all. But it's really interesting that when they're paying me, they love it. At least the brands that I work with.
They want to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to hear it. They want to know, because they want to know what to fix before it comes to market. Yeah.
That's very cool. Very cool. Okay, so you kind of got the deconstruction and the testing of the lamps. What goes into like designing them? Like, how do you come up with the blend for the spectrums, or like how does that all work?
This is something. I tried to kid myself, and it's one of those. Have you ever done like a house project, right, where you go into you're about to redesign a room, and you go in and you go, yeah, we'll stick that there, we'll put the shelf up there, and then when you actually come to putting the shelf up, there's no bit to get the screw into, and you're having the nightmare and you're pulling your hair out. And what was, when it first started as, yeah, we'll put a shelf up there, it ends up being, the walls torn to pieces and screw holes are everywhere, and you're shouting at the wife and you're kicking the door and you're getting really annoyed. That's essentially what happens with developing lights and spectral outputs. Is you think, we can do that, and then it just never works that way. But that's the best bit, I think, is looking back and looking at the progression when we look at the progression of things that we've done. So different lamps work in different ways. No shit. And the spectral output of a lamp depends on the type of lamp you're making. So if you're making an LED, the spectrum that it outputs, the color, if you like, that it outputs, is potentially mostly driven by the actual diode itself, the little chip, which for the most part you can tune them to any color essentially. But if you want to make one that is white, like I say, you need to put a coating on it, and you can develop a special coating with different chemicals that go on top, and that's called a phosphor coating, and that's an LED. A UVB lamp or a T5 of any kind, really, even any fluorescent lights they all used to have in your kitchen or your office, works the same way, or not the same way, works in a similar way. Is they are driven, instead of being driven by a diode, they are driven by vaporized mercury inside the tube. So we'll take a T5 tube, right? So T5 tube, this works the same for T8s, it works the same for, works the same for the compacts, the spiral lamps, works for all, they're all the same technology for the most part. And it's a tube of glass, and inside is a speck of mercury, a tiny speck. And sometimes you can even hear it. If the lamp is off and you move the lamp up and down, you can hear it going piece of mercury inside. And when the lamp ignites, when it turns on, there are special components inside that essentially make that mercury vaporize and turn into a gas, essentially. And there are other gases in the mix as well. And when mercury vaporizes, it lets off a spectrum, it lets off color. And you've almost certainly seen the color, well, not almost certainly, but if you've ever used a UVC sterilization lamp in an aquarium and they have that weird blue color, that's a mercury lamp without any phosphor. That's the same thing. Equally, a mercury vapor bulb, and they have that weird green color to them, that's mercury vaporizing in a tube, in a capsule. All we're doing, and this is me doing all we're doing and making it really easy when it's really not that easy, all we're doing is on the inside of the glass is we're coating it with a chemical that then glows in other colors. So mercury emits what are well-documented, what are called the mercury emission spikes or mercury emission lines, and there are set lines across the spectrum. And all we're doing is instead of using a diode, which is one color, to drive a phosphor, we're using the mercury spikes to drive a phosphor. And the phosphor is made up of different chemicals that are there's so many different things you can put into these lamps. And not only that, the ratios of the different chemicals, right? What you think is a tiny change ends up being a massive change in the output of the lamp. There's so many logistical, scientific, mad things that go on. But in a nutshell, you're putting a special powder coating that's usually mixed with a liquid that then kind of paints the inside of the glass. And then when the mercury is vaporized, it's then glowing, but then it's making the phosphor glow. And when that glows, we call it fluorescing. And that's fluorescent lamp. That's why it's called a fluorescent lamp, is that phosphor is then fluorescing in other colors. And it just so happens that UVB, for the sake of what we're trying to do, is a color. It acts like a color.
That was going to be my next question. You have to find the specific color that UVB is in.
Yes. And which phosphors emit that in a way that is like sunlight. That's what's hard.
And so is the different strengths of UVB different colors?
So when you say different, I'm assuming you mean like UVI? Like you mean like the different percentages on the lamps?
Yes.
Yes. Yes and no. Okay. Yes, because we use a slightly different blend. So if we say we're using blend 1 on this lamp, and we tweak it and make blend 2 for lamp B, and then tweak it again and make blend 3 for lamp C. Right? So slightly different blends in each lamp, and that's what changes the output. But also, it's the ratio of those blends. So in lamp A, if we want it to be a stronger UV lamp, we could put more of the UV phosphor in and less of the phosphor that makes the visible light, the white. And you'll notice that some lamps, what you tend to find is that the higher percentages emit less visible light. This is across all the brands. You tend to find that the higher the percentage, the higher the, they all have names, the UVB 300, the 12%, 14%, 10.0, they all have the higher version. The higher version tends to emit less visible light, and that is because, comparatively to the 5.0 or the 200 or whatever it may be, and that is because we've only got so much space, if you like, in the tube to put phosphor, and we've already kind of maxed out our UVB phosphor, if you like. So we have to, in order to get more, we have to take away some of the visible light phosphor, and thus it doesn't emit as much visible light, and that's why the lamp on a higher percentage lamp tends not to emit as much visible light, because we've actually taken away some of the visible light phosphor and replaced it with more UVB phosphor. And when I say there's about 18 UVB phosphors, so it's not one thing, but there's multiple phosphors in there. There are other ways of doing it as well. You can do things with the glass where those mercury emission points I was talking about, those mercury emission lines, one of them is at a really good wavelength, which is called 297 nanometers, which is a very good, technically safe wavelength. But can be very overpowering and dangerous if done incorrectly. What you can do is allow a little bit more of that through, and what that does is that rapidly increases the UVI, very rapidly. The more of that you let through. And what you find with a lot of the cheaper lamps is they let a lot of that 297 through. So the UVI is really high, but the actual lamp quality is not very good. Is essentially what you find.
Sorry, just plugging my laptop in. That is fascinating. Yeah, that is fascinating. So you said, okay, so you said there's 18 different or whatever number it is. Many different ones. Is it the same ones you're using every single time for different bulbs, or are there fixed ones that are better for reptile care than needing UVB for other things?
Really good question. Really good question.
So the question makes sense.
Yeah, this is actually a really good question.
Awesome.
Yes, there are well-defined ones that work for what we're trying to do. There are well-defined phosphor blends, and the two most famous are what are called LAP or LAP and BSP, and those are the two most famous phosphor types that we use for UVB for animals. And but they're not the same that you would use, say, on a sunbed tanning lamp, which also emits UVB, but it emits a different type of UVB. Or if you had a lamp for psoriasis, so a psoriasis lamp that you would use in medical care, that also emits a lot of UVB, but it uses what's called a TLO1 phosphor, which is a completely different kind of phosphor that is very powerful, very potent, but is not really what we're trying to do. And it kind of boils down to the definition I talked about earlier, which is the definition of replicating sunlight. And I promise this comes back to the question. I just want to put it into context. So when we bring an animal into our homes, I'm putting a definition on it here. When we bring an animal into our homes, what are we trying to do, right? We tend to say that we're trying to replicate sunlight, right? That's generally the rule, right? But actually, that's not necessarily true. There are kind of other definitions, right? Replicating sunlight isn't really a fair definition of what we're trying to do. You could say that, and I'm trying to think of a good way of doing it, is we're not replicating the sun. The sun is in space, right? We're not actually replicating the sun. What we're actually replicating is some light, okay?
And the beneficial parts of it.
Yeah, and even that isn't really true, because what we're actually trying to do is replicate sunlight as it hits the Earth on the surface, right? Because it's different at the atmosphere than it is at the... And this is me being very pedantic, but it makes sense when I get to the end.
Yeah.
Okay, but then what we're actually trying to do, if we delve even deeper, if we put more definition into it, is replicate sunlight on the Earth that an animal gets. That's specifically what we're trying to do. And then we can go even further. We can say we're trying to replicate sunlight on the Earth that an animal gets at the levels that an animal gets it when naturally basking. Right? That's actually what we're trying to do, is we're trying to recreate the levels of sunlight that an animal would be exposed to in the wild when basking. So we're not always trying to replicate sunlight word for word. We're actually trying to replicate specifically that niche of sunlight that animal is evolved to be exposed to. And for some animals, that's a lot more, and some animals, that's a lot less. And we call those the Ferguson zones, right, for UV specifically. For the sake of this, when I say replicate sunlight, what I mean is replicate sunlight at the level that an animal gets in the wild, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's just to kind of cover, but that's essentially what we're trying to do. And thus, when we recreate light, yeah, it's really pedantic, but when we recreate light, we need to recreate that, right? We need to recreate that bit. And that bit can be defined. We define that very easily, and we can take a spectral reading of the sun, the same way I do in the lab with the lights. I can take my spectrometer, it's portable. I can take it outside, and I can get a spectral reading of the sun. And I don't need to do this because many, many people have done this before. It's well documented. And we can use that as our standard. So where there is no standard for animal lighting, there is a standard because we refer to the light that the animal gets to. Yeah, we refer to the sun. And thus, we try to replicate that. And that can be split up into three main parts. Most people know as UV, visible light, and infrared. And those are the three parts of sunlight. Ultraviolet, UV, the rainbow, the colors, the visible light, and infrared. And infrared, people tend to get confused and think it's heat, and actually it's not. Infrared is a type of light. And it's actually about 50% of sunlight as well, so it's a big portion of light. And UV is only about, UVB at least, is only about 0.5% of sunlight, so it's tiny. It's this minuscule, it's very, very powerful and very useful, but it's only a tiny, tiny piece. And that's what we're trying to do. And humans are very good at subcategorizing things. So it's all well and good. Just like I've subcategorized the concept of light and into this very niche definition, humans do that with everything. And we do it with light. And most famously, we do it with visible light. And we define that into the colors of the rainbow. There are 7 colors of the rainbow, and those are the definitions. But actually, there's more than 7, right? You know that there's blue, green, there's violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. But actually, there's more than that. There's blue, green, which is kind of like the turquoisey color. That's a color that isn't defined by those 7. There's kind of reddy orange. That's a weird color that's a color that isn't defined by those 7. So we're going further into this niche. Equally, ultraviolet can also be defined and subdefined. And we subdefine it into ultraviolet A, ultraviolet B, and ultraviolet C, UVA, UVB, UVC. And even then, it can be gone even further. We can subdivide UVA into UVA 1 and 2. We could subdivide UVB into terrestrial and non-terrestrial UVB, because UVB is a category, but only some of it hits the Earth. And then UVC is a whole other category of, erythemal causing and all different things, which we don't need to worry about for this because it doesn't hit the Earth, so it's fine.
Cool.
So this what was UV is now UVA 1 and 2 and UVB terrestrial. Right? So we've now got separate definitions. You can even subdivide it again if you really want to. And what those other phosphors do, the TLO1 phosphor, for example, is produces a lot of that UVB, but it produces it in a way that is not like the way an animal gets when it's on Earth basking. So you could very easily change the phosphor in a lamp to produce a lamp that produces a lot of UV, like you say. But the aim, in my opinion, because we've agreed that what we're trying to do is replicate sunlight, the aim should be to replicate sunlight in those different pieces. So yes, we can up the UVI very easily, but is that better for the animal? It's not as good for welfare, because we've agreed the welfare is replicating sunlight that the animal gets. And that's the aim. That's the aim. And thus, that was the aim that's always the aim when I try and develop lights. But that was specifically the aim when we developed the Exo Terra T5 range, was focus specifically on the UVB portion of the spectrum and and we can talk about this a little bit later, and the UVA2 portion of the spectrum, because that's often forgotten about, to replicate sunlight better, because the existing lamps, or what was existing at the time, were not built with that in mind. Those phosphor blends were built with the mindset of, we need to stop blinding our animals, because all those phosphor blends were developed in 2007, 2008 time, when a different phosphor blend was being used that used a different chemical that produced very high UV, but animals had eye problems. They were developing eye and skin problems. And this is actually why now, to this day, people say don't use coil bulbs, because at the time it was all we had, and at the time they were using a dangerous phosphor. Modern coil bulbs don't use the dangerous phosphor, but unfortunately they've been tainted with this brush of they damage eyes.
They're dangerous, yeah.
That's because in 2007 they used a dangerous phosphor that would damage your eyes and damage the eyes of the animals. They produced a really high UVI reading if you put a solar meter up against them, but that was because they were focusing on that and not developing it to be like sunlight. So when they developed the phosphors for the modern T5s that we have now, they're pretty much the same phosphors that we see in modern T8s. It's the same thing. And they're about 10 or 15 years old, those things. Those phosphors are about 10 or 15 years old. And at the time, and they are perfectly safe, there's nothing wrong with them. At the time, they were the best thing ever, because they stopped your animals from going blind, if you use them properly, obviously. And they produced a significant UVI, right? The ultraviolet index, the reading from them was pretty good. So that's fine. We stuck with that for 10 years. And when Exo Terra approached me about coming to market with a T5 and whether I'd be on board with it, I said yes, but if you want to do it, there are two ways you can do this. Do you want to come out with a T5 that is the same as everybody else, which we can get very, very cheap, because the phosphor's been around for 15 years and you can get them made in China for ridiculously cheap. And the stuff that's being made in China at the moment that is one-to-one identical to the German brand stuff, the what we would consider the best in market. And we tested prototypes. We had prototypes sent from China, like, let's give it a go. And I mean, I don't know if I should say this, but some of them I preferred over some of the high quality German lamps that if you ask someone what's the favorite UVB brand, they would probably name, right? Without naming a brand, they would probably name certain brands. And
that's interesting.
The T5s that we were getting from China were better. They were lasting longer. They were not burnt. They were not solarizing as quickly. They had a nicer spectrum. They were better. And I said, if you're going to sell lamps, Exo Terra, and you just want to make a lot of money on it, you can get these ones. Get these ones, stick an Exo Terra sticker on them, job's done, right? You'll make a load of money. Or if you're going to do it and you want to make them better, then you need to spend time making them better. And ultimately, that's what they decided to do. I think they realized that if they're going to attack this market, they need to be different from other people, and they need it to be they need it to have a USP, right? They need it to have some sort of thing that is different, and it's not in any way an attack on other brands, because the other brands' lamps are safe and fine and suitable if used correctly. This is a way of saying, look, we're advancing, we're making it more like the sun. And they said, how do you do it? And we did this thing where you go into a room and you say, we'll put a thing there, we'll do that, we'll do that. We did that thing. So we said, yeah, we'll just stick this phosphor in, and I'm pretty sure we can just do that phosphor and we'll make it more like the sun. And, 18 months later, we're still smacking our heads against the wall because it's not working. But eventually what we did was find a very nice mix that worked very well at replicating the part of the spectrum that we care about for these lights, for this light source. So when we talked about visible light, infrared, UV, There isn't one light that can do all of those things, right? Mercury vapors claim they can, but they don't do it very well. We have to use a plethora of lights. We have to use a specific tube for UVB or a specific lamp for UVB. We have to use a specific source for visible light. And we have to use a specific source for infrared. And this is generally why we tend to say a heat light, an LED, and a T5 UVB lamp, right? Those three will sort of cover the spectrum. They don't quite, but they will generally cover the spectrum. In my opinion, there are better options, but for now, that's a general fix. And you use the T5, the tube, for UVB. So let's focus the attention on the UVB. Let's ignore, or not massively ignore, but let's take a step back from trying to make it visible and bright and white. There's no point, because you use LEDs for that, or you use other light sources for that, or halide, or something, whatever it may be. So we can sort of ignore that part of the spectrum, and then that opens us up. We've taken away 40-50% of the phosphor that's in the lamp. Now all of a sudden we've got all this space we can play with. So let's have a play, and we do, and we make some crazy lamps that you wouldn't ever want to recreate because they're laser beams, and we also recreate some that are match sunlight really well, but they're so weak that you need to be this far away to get any sort of reading off them because they're so that we did both extremes. And eventually what we worked towards was this phosphor blend that worked really well for replicating UVB and UVA2. It wasn't amazing at replicating visible light, and it certainly didn't produce any infrared in any sort of capacity. But my argument and the talks we had at the time were, that's not what this light is for. And if somebody is using a T5 UVB tube as a visible light source in their enclosure, then quote unquote, they're doing it wrong, right? That's not what it's for. It's for UVB. You buy it as a UVB lamp.
Absolutely.
And thus that's what we should use it for. We should make it a UVB lamp. And that's what we did. Essentially, is this phosphor blend was then they trademarked it under the name Sunergy, and they applied it slightly different tweaked versions for the three different lamps, three different types: the UVB 100, 200, and 300.
Yeah.
And that's what we came out with. Is that, and it was a lot of work, but at no point, and this is amazing for me, at no point did we argue or shout or scream. It was always...
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. It was always, this is working, or it's not working, and thus we can learn from it. It was always that. And that's something I really like working with Exo Terra on, is that we're developing other lamps going forward. We always are. And I always feel really bad when I say, look, if you make this change, I think this is the one, and they send me the new lamp and it doesn't work, and I go, I'm really sorry. But they're actually always really, really receptive to it and say, look, we now know for future not what to do. And it's always a learning thing. And the guys at Exo Terra at Basecamp in Belgium are very keen on getting it right. I think they have the slogan. What's the slogan? Is it like the home in yours or something?
Exo Terra makes quality products for your pet reptiles to make them feel at home.
Yes, make them feel at home. There you go.
Yes.
And that is and that is always the ethos that they have, right? Is the make them feel at home idea.
Yeah.
And that boils down to this UV being a part of sunlight that is what they're naturally exposed to at the levels they should be exposed to when basking in sun. And that is essentially what we're trying to replicate. And that's what we, I think we did a pretty good job of it with the Exo Terra T5 range, is we took a blend of phosphors that worked and is safe and suitable and isn't, nothing necessarily wrong with it, but we made it better, in my opinion.
Awesome.
That was the goal, and I think that's what we achieved. I think we did a pretty good job of achieving that, of making it better as a UVB lamp. And that's the story of the Exo Terra T5s in a nutshell. There was a lot more to it. There was a lot of crying.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, you said it took 18 months.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was more than 18 months. It was couldn't even say. More like it's been more like 2 years of pure testing. Ironically, right at the very start, we had a blend that almost worked, and I kept that lamp burn just working away, and tested it at the end of the testing, and it was still fine. And I was like, oh, if we'd have just used that lamp, it would have been 99.9% there.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have had all. You could have launched the light by now and sold it, but oh well. We went the roundabout route. I think
you got the 100%. You went for the best of the best.
Yeah. Well, that's it, and I don't think they would have stopped until we did. I think that was their main thing.
That's awesome.
There was lots of fun setbacks as well that were logistical fun problems, but they were all sorted.
For sure. And so you mentioned, so they have the UVB and the UVA. Or maybe could you just break down? We already know how you made them and what makes them different. What benefits make them better? I guess is like so, what do they do better than everything else on the market currently?
They, in terms of what they do better, is they match the spectrum of sunlight more closely. Is in the area of UVB and UVA2 specifically. And UVA2 is if we're talking welfare, is a vital part of the electromagnetic spectrum, the light spectrum.
That most people are forgetting.
Now, it does exist in pretty much all of the T5 lamps, but not in the same proportions as sunlight. And sunlight has a little bit of UVB, about 0.5% of the output is UVB. And about 7% is UVA. This changes depending on the time of day and all this sort of stuff. But as a general rule, about 7% of the output is of what you could get from the sun is UVA. And UVA we split into two parts, UVA1 and UVA2. And if you were to sit with me today and reclassify ultraviolet into its parts, and reclassify visible light and UV and all that sort of stuff, we were to redefine them, UVB, I would personally define, and UVA2, I would bunch them together. And that would be UVB, or whatever I would call it. That would be that. Right. So UVA2 is more closely related to UVB than it is to UVA1. It's all the same spectrum, but UVA2 is more famously associated with, or not necessarily famously, but more widely associated with vitamin D and the regulation of vitamin D synthesis, which is what we know UVB to be, right?
Right.
So when we say UVA2, we're really meaning like sub UVB, like this sort of like it's more UVB than it is UVA, right? If we were to, like I say, if we were to redefine today, UVA would be a different thing. And UVA1 is something else entirely. UVA1, we generally associate it with being a color, like the colors of the rainbow. And reptiles, pretty sure every reptile can see, or most reptiles at least, can see UVA1. So that is a color to them.
So they can see more colors than we can?
Many of them can, yeah. They're what are called tetrachromats, yeah. They can see more colors than we can. So we can see red, green, and blue. We have 3 photoreceptor cone types, red, green, and blue, or long, medium, and short. They have slightly different ones, and often a 4th one. Now, some of them only have 3, but it's UV, red, green, so they don't have the blue, or whatever it may be, but they'll most of the time they have a UV cone, either as well or on top of, or instead of, I should say. So that is a color to them, right? And with that comes a whole host of, there's a really good book called An Immense World by Ed Yong. And cool. he talks about this. It's an audiobook as well if you want to listen to it. But he talks about this and what we call photoreceptor opponency. And he talks about it really well, puts it really well, where he says that humans can see a triangle of colors, right? We see red, green, and blue. And there are three pieces. And that's like a triangle. If you imagine an animal that's a tetrachromat, such as many reptiles, tortoises, things like that, and pretty much all birds, I think, are tetrachromats, they're more like a pyramid than a triangle, right? They're a 3-dimensional range of colors that they have because they have this whole world of colors that we can't even imagine.
Right.
But that is completely separate to the UVA2 side, which is the vitamin D, right? Those are completely widely associated with different things, but we call them both UVA, and it's very annoying. Which is one of those frustrating things on modern reptile products is you see on the side of a lamp, it'll say 7% UVB or 6% UVB, and it'll say 20% UVA. It doesn't tell you what kind of UVA it is. It just tells you it's UVA. And most of the output of all T5s, when in terms of UVA, is UVA2, which is the vitamin D bit and not the color bit. Equally, when you have halogen lights, they usually say UVA on the box as well. And that, to me, is one of the biggest lies that the reptile world has ever been told, because they emit less than 0.1% UVA. It's such a small amount of UVA.
So it doesn't even...
It's just a lie, right? They put UVA in the box. It's a lie. So UVA1 is completely missed out. And that's one of the projects that I'm working on with Exo Terra, is including that in enclosures, because that is missing from pretty much all enclosures.
In future lamps.
In future products, yeah. The aim for the T5 range was to fix or make better the spectrum of UVB and UVA2, which is the vitamin D side, so the vitamin D area. Because currently, the T5s would have a decent UVB spectrum that matches sunlight fairly closely. And then as soon as it got to UVA, it would taper off. And when you look at sunlight does not taper off. Sunlight keeps increasing in intensity as you get higher and as you get further along the spectrum. So UVB, there's a tiny bit. UVA2, there's a lot more. UVA1, there's a lot more. Visible light, there's a lot more. And infrared, it kind of goes off on a massive... There's loads of infrared. So and that proportion we measure, and you can actually measure it if you have both the main kinds of solar meter, the 6.5 and the 6.2. We call it the solar meter ratio. So if you take a reading from a 6.5 and then a reading from 6.2, the ratio in sunlight is, again, depends on the time of day, around... For every 1 UVI, you get around 50 on the UVB meter, the solar meter 6.2. So for every number 1 you get on the 6.5, you get around 50 on the 6.2. Wow. And that's what we call the solar meter ratio. It's 50 to 1 of sunlight, approximately. Meanwhile, the ratio of the T5s was 25 or 30 to 1. So it was half. It was essentially half. So there was half as much UVA2 as there should be. Or as when I say should be, as there is in sunlight. And that was essentially the aim to fix. Now, there are many caveats on... It's very difficult because the ratio is... What the ratio is actually doing is measuring long wave versus short wave, and it's difficult to get right. But a general rule is that. And that is essentially what we were trying to fix. We were trying to make... We set out with a goal of making that ratio more like sunlight physically on a spectrum. So making that little bit of UVB and then a lot of UVA2, rather than a little bit of UVB and a little bit of UVA2, like there is in the current range or in the existing stuff. And that's what we did is we made the UVA2 much more proportional in terms of its output. There's much more UVA2 proportion to the UVB than there is in other T5s, and thus it replicates sunlight more. That's the technical definition of what we did. Is made it more like the sun is the easiest way of saying it.
Fascinating. I'm grasping everything, but I'm also
I'm so sorry.
Lost. No, you're good. This is so fascinating. It is making me want to do more research on the topic now, which is I think exactly what we needed to do anyway. You need to inspire people to do more research on the topic, and I think you've definitely done that.
I hope so. I do go off on my little things, but I that's essentially the aim, is to always inspire people to look more and realize that we could do better, and that's the idea of advancing. It's what has currently served us has served us well.
I think you've done a very good job at it.
Yeah, and I made a job out of it. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm saying you're doing a very good job out of it. But yes, I guess you made a job or a career out of it as well. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and thank you. Yeah, that's been the aim, is to advance.
That's awesome.
take steps in making things better, and ultimately making it easier for consumers as well, right? We can all, it's not impossible to make a super lamp that could do it all, theoretically, but making it reasonably available and not overly expensive is a second, from the Tomaskas perspective, a secondary perspective. And ultimately that's where the companies like Exo Terra, etc., have to put their business head on and say, look, we need to make a profit out of this as well.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to make it relatively inexpensively. We can't, it's all well and good you saying you could add this phosphor and that phosphor and this phosphor and that phosphor, but if it's a £2,000 tube to manufacture, you're never going to sell that, because you're going to do your markups. You're never going to sell it.
Yeah.
So realistically, we need to advance as technology advances. And currently we're in a situation where technology is advancing. So we're in a situation where we can make changes to things like tubes and LEDs and things like that. We can make slight changes as the technology is growing.
That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely agreed. And you already said you're working on some other products as well, so I'm excited to see what else comes down further down the line. Would you say that this is currently the best UVB on the market, commercially available?
Defining best as what replicates the sunlight the most?
Right, most, yes.
Then yes. The range, the Exo Terra T5, UVB 100, 200, and 300, in their respective niches, if you like, low output, medium output, high output, they replicate sunlight better than any other T5 lamps on the market. Yeah, from any brand. There are some that have very good spectral outputs. There are some that don't have very good. But in terms of spectral output and in terms of matching it to sunlight in the area of UVB and UVA2, the Exo Terra T5 range is the best at doing that. Yeah. If you define best as what's available in my country, and you're in a country where they don't sell Exo Terra, then no, it's probably not the best. Right. Yes. Yeah. It's just as simple as that. Or if you define the best as the one with the brightest white light, then no, it's not the best. But in my opinion, that's not what defines the best. There are better options if you want one to produce visible light, but my opinion is that you shouldn't be using it for visible light. Yeah,
one that best replicates the sun.
In the areas of UVB and UVA2, yes.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And now Jesse DeLuca from Exo Terra Canada actually mentioned to me that Toronto Zoo is in fact looking to start using them.
Yes.
Can you comment on that? I don't know if you're allowed to comment on that.
I don't know what I am allowed to comment on. I've spoken to some people at Toronto Zoo and given them some advice on some lighting setups. I can tell you that much. I can tell you some zoos that in the UK that have them in use because I've installed them.
So they are being used in zoos. Yeah. If you could, that'd be awesome.
Zoos are actively. So I presented them at a zoo conference slightly before they were announced. I did get permission beforehand, and showed them to some zoos at the time, some of the big zoos in the UK. Anyone knows the UK, they'll know the kind of top 5 UK zoos, basically those guys.
Yeah.
And every single one of them took some lamps away. And every single one of them has reported back positively.
Awesome.
And in terms of from a welfare perspective, if we're doing a welfare assessment, which is something I do in the zoo world, we have a marked improvement and measurable improvement in welfare on the enclosures that use them. For example, the King Cobra in London Zoo uses them, and there's a marked welfare improvement on that animal. The gorillas in London Zoo, off show, they don't use them on show because they're a nightmare. But the gorillas off show There's legislation in the UK that says that primates should be should have UV, and London Zoo opted for the Exo Terra T5 range because it's a better to replicate sunlight better, right? So that's the welfare team sat down and decided, let's use these ones because they do it better. I could give you the list of animals, but those guinea pigs I spoke about earlier, right? They use the Exo Terra T5s now. Now that they're available, they use the Exo Terra T5s. The rabbits in the same area, I think I'm installing them on the 14th of April, which is soon.
Yeah, a couple of days.
Yeah, we're filming it. We've filmed a lot of stuff that we've installed in the zoo, and then there are still some bits that just little. Basically, we went on the day and things weren't. The electronics weren't finished, so we had to go. Okay, we'll come back. So we're going back and filming extra bits, and then I'm going to post some videos on those on my YouTube channel of the kind of like silly little vlog videos of us installing lights and the fun stuff that happens when you install lights in a gorilla enclosure, for example, and for the reptile people, king cobra enclosure and different reptiles and stuff like that as well. So it's interesting to see them be used, and it's interesting as well to get independent welfare assessments done on those enclosures and have the welfare score increase from the last time after using these lamps. Which is really good. Yeah, that's what we set out to do, right? That's for the very start when we were talking today. Is literally we're talking about improving welfare and the what we can do to boost that welfare, and does it improve the animal's welfare? Yes, this has done that.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, undoubtedly, and in homes, right? People are doing it in homes. I use it exclusively, I think, in my home now, as a T5 UVB source.
Yeah.
They're a good lamp, and they a load of the questions I get about them are they compatible with the other fixtures? And the answer is yes. Are they compatible with some of the dimmable fixtures that are out there? And yes, the answer is yes. They're compatible as long as the wattage is the same. It's compatible with every existing fixture. So if you've got an existing fixture and you're due your 12-month replacement tube, you could opt for an Exo Terra T5 in place, as long as you got the equivalent sort of high output, low output, medium output version. You could stick your same brand if you wanted to, or you could do what I consider a welfare improvement and get the Exo Terra T5 range, which is I think is a bit of a thing to say. It's quite scary saying that, because it sounds almost like I'm doing some sort of weird false advertising, and I should caveat it with different things, but I like wholeheartedly it is.
You've proved your work works well, and you're confident in the product. There's nothing wrong with
There's other people that say this, right? There's
Yeah.
Dr. Thomas Rowe in the UK is a vet who's really interested in lighting. He has a little lab with a setup as well at home. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but to quote him, he says they replicate sunlight better in the areas of UVB and UV2. He says that, and he's completely independent, right? He wasn't paid to develop the phosphor blender, wasn't paid to develop the lamps, and he's completely independent, and he's a vet.
He's not biased, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it's been a heck of a project, and it's something I'm very proud of, and I'm excited for more to come. And it's worth noting, I don't just work with Exo Terra, right? We're in a strange world with lighting at the moment, with the T5 stuff. I have to be careful how I say this. The factory that historically made the lamps that
other brands
would use,
closed
in 2023.
I did hear about this, yes.
Yeah, and those brands have had to rely on old stock, to kind of backlogs of stock to keep them going, and in the meantime, work on new factories to make
new blends and new lights.
Yeah. And at the time, I approached everyone involved and said, you have an opportunity here to change the phosphor blend when you change factory and improve it, because you both I say both. There's two companies. You both use you both use the same phosphor blend that's been used by each other and for the last 10 years, 15 years. You have a real opportunity here to launch with the accolade of new improved phosphor, new improved spectrum. Don't just go for the same stuff again. You have a real opportunity to do that. One of those companies has done that and has made marked improvements to the spectrum from the new factory. And the other one has not. And anyone can, I'll put posting reports on my website soon, and they're completely independent reports. But one company has done an amazing job of improving the spectrum within the time frame that they've been given. Right? They weren't given the 18 months of leeway to play with phosphors and play with this and basically have me on call. But with what we have had, we've made a marked improvement to those lamps, like a genuine marked improvement. Those lamps are now, dare I say it, more, well, they're definitely more sun-like than they were before in terms of UVB. And if we were to say Exo Terra it has the most sunlight, these would be second, a pretty close second.
That's awesome.
So they've done a really good job of changing the spectrum and using that as an opportunity to make an improvement on the lamps. And that's a really good thing to see because they've seen that there's an opportunity to do that. Some brands don't do that, and that's fine. That's up to them. But the change in factory is a real worry at the moment with lighting, because everything that we have, if people go on the Reptile Lighting Facebook group or pretty much any Facebook group, they will be given generally a set of recommendations based on distances from lamps. They'll say, you have a bearded dragon and you have this lamp, then you need to be this far away. And your bearded dragon will have the correct UVI.
Yeah.
Those numbers don't work anymore because the lamps are now different. Even the ones that are the same, but they're in the new factory, it's a different lamp and it emits a different spectrum.
Right.
And the strength isn't as high anymore.
So that previous standard now
your standard cabinet 45 centimeters away doesn't apply anymore.
Yeah.
So all of these, there's a real shift in getting this information out to people. Again, my reports will be coming soon. I don't know when, but the company involved hasn't made any effort to make changes to their recommendations. They still recommend the same, but the lamp is markedly different. And the brand that is making the improvements to the spectrum is hilariously making changes to the recommendations or ensuring that the new lamps are within the same recommendations, so they don't need to change the recommendations.
Right.
So yeah, it's an interesting world at the moment because the way we're shifting in perspective on what can be considered standard and the advice that is considered standard for everyone is now obsolete. It's now obsolete, and I think you're probably the first person I've said that to publicly. I think I should probably make a public statement on this as well. But yeah,
you have a couple of weeks till this comes out, so you have time to make that statement.
I'm sure I can have my reports ready by then.
Yeah,
it's an interesting one because a lot of people will use. We have these same graphs where it's the same graphs of this lamp, this fixture, this distance, and it shows you a bunch of numbers and how far away you need to be for a bearded dragon or whatever it may be. That's just wrong now. It's just wrong. Those graphs were made 4 or 5 years ago. That's just, the lamps have changed, and it's a worry that so many people could still be using that old data on the new lamps when they start trickling to the shelves from the new factories. One brand, the new factory will be launching them soon, and the other brand, the new factory is live. So a lot of them you can see.
Are they still in the same factory, or are they all being done in different factories now?
Which is also another, in my opinion, USP, right? Is that they're now not the same lamp. And a lot of companies don't like you talking about the factories and which factories there are. And I think it's quite an old-fashioned thing because a lot of that is public data anyway. But there are essentially now 3 three primary producers of T5s in Europe. If you want to have a lamp made in Europe, if you want it made in China, you can get them made all sorts of places. In fact, one of them I'm in contact with, hilariously, this is a side note, hilariously, when Sylvania, the factory that closed in Germany that used to make a lot of lamps, a lot of the staff that worked in Sylvania were Chinese. There were people that they brought over from China to work in the factory, like scientists to work on the phosphors and development of products. Sylvania closed. Those people just moved back to China.
Continue doing the same thing in different factories.
Yeah. So now you go to the factories where they're working and they go, oh, yeah, I used to, and you go, oh, I know you. You were at Sylvania 2 years ago. Oh, yeah. And then, so now they could just do the same thing in China. So, which is why if we want to advance, we need to, if you want to advance using European people, then you need to do that now. Otherwise, you may as well just go to China, which is fascinating. What I said to Exo Terra at the time, isn't it? Is just go to China because the people now are just working over there again.
Yeah.
There's a company that's, that I'm working with in China that's developing some T5s, and literally I think like 3 or 4 members of the staff are just Sylvania staff that would just work for the last 8 years worked at Sylvania in the product development team, and now just moved back to China again and work there.
And are working on the same product for a different company.
Yeah, exactly. They know the blend. They've made it for the last 8 years. They know what they're doing. And hilariously, because it's the same scientists, they can also make improvements to it. So they can make it better than the old German one, which is crazy. So it's interesting. It's interesting. It's an interesting world moment with lighting. We're in an advancement era.
Fascinating.
Yes.
I know. I feel like I've said that a lot of times on this episode, but really all of this is fascinating. You have it's crazy to think how much is really happening behind the scenes in terms of welfare, in terms of bettering husbandry, and all these companies kind of, the everyone's trying to improve in different ways, coming up with different ideas, and it's just all it's awesome, and it's very cool. It must be very cool to see it on the inside as well.
It is really fun to have an insight into it. It is really interesting. Yeah. It's almost like a behind the scenes on a DVD, right?
Yeah,
then you see the little interviews with the actors and stuff, and those are always my favorite bit of the DVDs, and I kind of like that I'm able to do that for the lighting world. It's quite fun. Give a little insight into it.
Very cool. Awesome, Tom. Thank you very, very, very much for coming on and doing this. Absolutely, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on, and the information was fascinating. I think this is the longest episode I've recorded in a very, very long time. No. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. I'm like, I mean, it's late night where you are. I'm still good here. But yeah, so you said there's a lot of reports coming soon. Where can people go to find these reports? What is the YouTube channel as well? Can you let everybody know where they can find you and keep up with you?
My website, you can go to www.tomaskas.com. That's TOMASKAS.com. Or you can go to .co.uk. That's the actual website. If you go to .com, it just follows you to the .co.uk. The YouTube is Tomaskas Limited, so TOMASKAS Ltd. If you go to Tomaskas on YouTube, that's my old personal one from when I was a kid. So I think I've hidden all the videos now, but Tomaskas Limited is my work YouTube, if you like, where I post informational videos and content on how LEDs work, for example, is a video on there. Instagram is the Tomaskas, THETOMASKAS, the Tomaskas, and on Facebook is just Thomas Griffiths on the Reptile Lighting Group. That's my main places. Or if you want to email me, tom@tomaskas.co.uk.
Awesome. All those links will be in the show notes, and the link to the Reptile Lighting Facebook group. It'll be in there so you can keep up with all the updates that are happening. And yeah, fascinating. Hopefully you'll be willing to maybe come back in a couple of months and update us on what else has been happening with you. And
hopefully we can talk about once Jesse gives you the thumbs up to talk about things publicly, we can talk about things publicly about things that are coming soon.
Awesome. I'm very excited.
Product or two,
yeah, that would be very cool to do. Lots more coming from Exo Terra very soon.
Stuff,
keep your eyes open, and now that's all about it. Get the new T5 UVBs. You've already heard how great they are, the best. Not my words. The no, okay. I'll done.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll done doing the plugging. Go check out the new UVBs. Thank you, Tom, very much for coming on and giving us all this awesome knowledge. And everyone else, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you on the next one.